hole out in the foyer there. Help yourself to the mangoes because the bats, the lorikeets, the cockatoos, and all that are destroying the fruit. There's buckets and buckets of half-eaten fruit that my wife has made mango chutney. So if there's something that looks good and you want it, please take it because the birds will wreck it. This morning, as we continue our thoughts on who God is, we're looking at, my name is God and I can do anything. And another word that we use for that is the omnipotence or power of God. And I guess the question is, does God's power make any difference to us in our lives, in everyday living? What difference does God's power make in your life and my life? We know about it, we talk about it, but does it really make any difference? You see, we talk about the theory of these things. God is that, God is this, and God is everything. But when it comes to omnipotence, our conceptions about God, we know the theory. But the practical application of that, if God is this, what difference does it make in my life? What difference does it make having a powerful God that can do anything and everything? Or is that just a cliche? Is it just something that, yeah, we've been taught, we've been knee-high to a grasshopper, we just accept, but our lives don't reflect that we believe God has the power to do anything and everything he wants. Now, it's interesting, some people's ideas about God, and I looked some of these up. Some feel that God is like Santa Claus. And Santa Claus is a person who is kind, someone who's forgiving, doesn't let anything bother him, and he sits back in his rocking chair up in heaven and watches over mankind. That's a person's concept. In fact, that was a 15-year-old's concept of God when they were asked, who do you think God is? Other people seem to think God is a strict disciplinarian. He just waits and watches for you to do the wrong thing so he can jump on you and punish you. He's a strict disciplinarian. Some other people think that God is just an absentee creator. He made the world, but can't be bothered with its everyday running. Other people look at God as a friend who you can turn to in any situation. He's there to help walk you through every situation, but he's not someone that tells you whether you need to do this or that or holds you accountable for your actions and words. But all of these concepts have an impact where it concerns our belief in who God is. For example, if you think God is just a friend, that he doesn't care about what you do, that he just wants you to be happy and allows you to do whatever you want, it impacts your life and the way you live. If you think God is a strict disciplinarian, then you might be afraid to confess your sin and decide it's easier to run away from him. Because every belief, every concept we have about God affects how we live every day. So it's important that we have a correct view of who God is. We can't live with the freedom and joy that comes from trusting and following the one true God. Today, we want to look at the power of God, or the omniscience. And the definition means just all-powerful. It refers to the fact that God's power is infinite. It's unlimited. It's not restricted. He can do whatever he wants with his power. And he has the power to do whatever he wills. He has all the resources and the ability to achieve his will in every circumstance throughout the universe. So basically, a simple definition, God is able. God is able. If you remember nothing else, God is able to do everything he needs to do or wants to do, whatever he chooses to do it. So God has the power and the ability and the strength to do whatever he wants. He's all powerful. He's somebody who can be reckoned with. And it's shown that throughout the scripture and throughout history. Now that's something that's difficult for us as human beings to get our heads around. This truth. God's power is infinite. Yet we are limited and we are restricted by the knowledge of things we can see or understand. Now, what's it like to imagine having infinite power? If you had infinite power, what could you do? What could stop you? Who could stop you? But alas, no one has infinite power. So what's that look like? We get a glimpse in our limited understanding. We see the power that can be through nature. You get a fantastic thunderstorm or even a cyclone, you'll see the power. If you sit by the sea and you see the waves being whipped up, there's raw power there. And so we're limited in our understanding of what that power is like. But the scriptures tell us our God has infinite power, the power to do whatever he wants. And so it affects everything. It's without limitations. Now, the demonstration of this, the truth of this is so important for us to understand. If God is not who he says he is, then he has no control over anything. Now, this truth is talking about God's sovereignty and his omnipotence. It's saying that God is in control of all things, that he alone has the power to change things according to his will. Now, if we take God out of the equation and we just say, okay, I don't believe there is a God, then what happens? What's left? If we remove God and said there is no God, there is no person who controls things, then who's left? Man. You see, man says, we have to take the place. And so we use our technology and our intelligence to take God's place. And in our society, we're being taught through our schools and universities that we can control our destiny. We can control our environment. We can control the future. We need to implement plans and take action now if we're to achieve and sustain these goals. Does that sound familiar? What is that called? Oh, what was that again? Climate change. Now, I'm not talking about climate change. I'm talking about something more. Because the climate does change. We have the change of seasons, wet and dry. We have 4 seasons in other places. So, the climate does change, and it's always changed since the flood. So there's always going to be a change in climate. But what am I talking about? What is the new worship and the new God that is being presented? Climate control. Climate control. And it's being taught to our children. It's been promoted throughout society. It's been told that it's imperative that we've got to save the planet now before it's too late. Sound familiar? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, and I want you to do this, not now, but who can give me a definition of what climate control is? Anything else? You know, I didn't think it would be that hard to find a definition, but I went on all these different websites and I got all this rubbish, if I say it, just to confuse you. All I wanted was a simple definition of climate control. And this is what I found. This is a simpler definition. Climate control refers to the various methods and technologies employed to manage and regulate the temperature, humidity, and overall atmospheric conditions within a defined space. I can do that. There's an air conditioner here. I've got control. But how do I do that in the world? How do I control humidity? When I walk outside, how do I control the humidity and the heat? But hang on a minute. I've been told we've got to take action now. So what should I do? Any of the young people want to tell me, or uni students, because you're getting hit with all this stuff. It's on our TV all the time as though it's a gospel message. Ask Greta Thunberg. She's sitting in a bug-infested jail right now complaining. But she's the climate control activist who said, this is going to happen to my planet and we've got to do things. You see, they've come up with all ideas about what we are to do. And what they're saying is, if we can master and control the climate, we can make sure that we all live healthier lifestyles. We can reduce our carbon footprints. We can adapt to the changing demands of our environments. And it's saying we can't afford to be spectators in this. We have to be the architects. We have to have the power to shape not only our current climate crisis, but also what the future holds. Now, is there anything wrong with that? And I'm amazed that quite a few Christians are right into this. You see, what it is a blatant statement that replaces God with man. And it's saying that as man, we can control the future, that we can somehow control nature, the weather, the environment. Well, that sounds all good and well, but is it true? Because when I looked up my Bible, and I did, and I'm going to put these verses up concerning climate control, not climate change. Climate change is always happening. But climate control, there's only one person that can control things, and that's not you and me. If we look at these, if we look at what it says in Job 37, and these are good to mark down. He turns his lightning loose under the whole sky. He sends it to the furthest parts of the earth. After that, you can hear the roar when he thunders with a great sound. He does not hold back the flashing when his voice is heard. God's voice thunders in wonderful ways. He does great things we cannot understand. He says to the snow, fall on the earth, and to the shower, bear heavy rain. So that tells me very clearly just in that, who's in control of nature? Where do our thunderstorms and rain come from? Oh, us, of course. All we have to do is... Then we've got, in Job again, the breath of God makes ice and the wide waters become frozen. He fills the clouds with water and scatters his lightning through them. At his command, they swirl around over the whole earth, doing whatever he commands. He uses the clouds to punish people or to water his earth and show his love. Job, listen to this. Stop and notice God's miracles. Do you know how God controls the clouds and makes his lightning flash? Do you know how the clouds hang in the sky? Do you know the miracles of God who knows everything? And it continues. Job says, I know that you can do all things and that no plan of yours can be ruined. You ask, who is this that made my purpose unclear by saying things that are not true? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand. I talked of things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now and I will speak. I will ask you questions and you must answer me. My ears had heard of you before, but now my eyes have seen you. So now I hate myself. I will change my heart and life. I will sit in the dust and ashes. But there's more. Oops. In Psalm 147, 4 and 5, he counts the stars. He names each one. Our Lord is great and very powerful. There is no limit to what he knows. And in Psalm 147, again, he fills the sky with clouds and sends rain to the earth and makes grass grow on the hills. He spreads the snow like wool and scatters the frost like ashes. He throws down hail like rocks. No one can stand the cold he sends. Then he gives a command and it melts. He sends the breezes and the waters flow. That would be enough to convince me, but maybe you need more. In Psalm 109, you built the earth on its foundation so it can never be moved. You covered the earth with oceans. The water was above the mountains, but at your command the water rushed away. When you thundered your orders, it hurried away. The mountains rose, the valleys sank, the water went to the places you made for it. You set borders for the seas that they cannot cross, so water will never cover the earth again. So when we hear so-called science say that if we don't take action now, some of these islands are going to go under the water. What does Scripture tell us? God sets the boundaries for the waters and they don't go any further. No matter what our science says, this is what God says. I'm the one that controls. I'm the one that sets the boundaries for these things. In Jeremiah, we find God made the earth by his power. He used his wisdom to build the world and his understanding to stretch out the skies. When he thunders, the waters in the skies roar. He makes clouds rise in the sky all over the earth. He sends lightning with the rain and brings out the wind from his storehouses. And in Isaiah, who has measured the oceans in the palm of his hand, who has used his hand to measure the sky, who has used a bowl to measure all the dust of the earth and scales to weigh the mountains and hills, who has known the mind of the Lord and been able to give him advice? Whom did he ask for help? Who taught him the right way? Who taught him knowledge and showed him the way to understanding? But there's more. Oops. Remember this and do not forget it. Think about these things, you who turn against God. Remember what happened long ago. Remember that I am God. There is no other God. I am God. There was no one like me. From the beginning I told you what would happen in the end. A long time I told you things that have not yet happened. When I plan something, it happens. What I say to do, I will do. In Proverbs, wisdom was with the Lord when he began his work, long before he made everything else. I was created in the very beginning, even before the world began. I was born before there were oceans or springs overflowing with water, before the hills were there, before the mountains were put in place. God had not made the earth or fields, not even the first dust of the earth. I was there when God put the skies in place, when he stretched the horizon over the oceans, when he made the clouds above and put the deep underground springs in place. I was there when he ordered the sea not to go beyond the borders he had set. I was there when he laid the earth's foundations. What it's telling me is the scriptures tell me who's in control. And it's not you and me. It's God. God is in control, and he alone has all the power to do all things, and whatever he wants to do, he will do. And there's no one who can stop him. Not even man with his idea of climate control. Now, is there anything God cannot do? God can do everything. He can do anything. But is there something that God cannot do? Well, there is a difference that we need to understand. There are some things that God will not do. God cannot, first of all, deny himself. In 2 Timothy 2:13, if we are unfaithful, he remains faithful, since he cannot deny himself. The second thing is he cannot lie. In Titus 1:2, that faith and that knowledge come from the hope for this life forever. When God promised us before time began, God cannot lie. The third thing is God cannot be tempted to evil. In James 1:13, when people are tempted, they should not say, God is tempting me. Evil cannot tempt God, and God himself does not tempt anyone. And the fourth thing is God cannot go against his nature. In Numbers 23:19, God is not a human being, and he will not lie. He is not a human, and he does not change his mind. What he says he will do, he does. What he promises, he makes come true. So there are certain things that God will not do that go against who he is. So he won't act against his nature. And this morning, as we look at Psalm 139, verses 13 through 18, we read, For you created my innermost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was woven in the secret places, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. Now, our psalmist David is still making a declaration, and he does so in these verses 13 and 14. He makes an interesting declaration about God's power here. Now, how does God know David so well? In such a way that David is saying, there is nothing that my God doesn't know about me. You see, there's nothing that God doesn't know about every person in this room. He is involved in our lives in a daily way. David says God shaped and formed him in his mother's womb. That's the power of creation. The word for form means to possess. To possess. And the inward part is reference to one's, this is interesting, to one's kidney. Have you ever looked at your kidney lately? If you have, put your hand up. I'm not saying you got a doctor to look at your kidney. How many of you checked your kidneys today to make sure that they're doing what they do?
Yeah. I checked my kidneys just recently, all healthy.
Okay, and you checked them today and the kidney said, I'm fine, gave you the thumbs up. You see, well, that's amazing because I can't see my kidneys. They're hidden. I know they function, I know they work, and I'm thankful they do work, but I can't see my kidneys. So what is David saying here? The inward part. The Hebrew is saying your kidneys. And what he's actually referring to is the hidden part of the body, the things that we cannot see. You knitted me together. It means to weave, to embroider. And it includes all of David's physical features. We have a little baby up the back. Wonderful gift. Does it have all fingers and toes? Who does it follow, mum or dad, or both? It has both. But what it's saying is that God was there and included all the hands, the toes, the ears, the legs, but all the personality, the moods, his temperament, all that makes him who he is. God was there, and it was God's power that created David's life. So David was not an accident. No person is an accident. It's by God's creation and God's design. You are who you are. Now you might say, I'm not happy with the way I look. Well, that's tough. You were born that way. And God designed you that way. He made you that way so that you are who you are. And David is declaring more, he's asserting, there is nobody else who has such an extensive knowledge about David more than the God who created and molded him before he was ever conceived and became a reality. So think about it. You were in God's mind before you became born a reality. God knew all about you and still does. Now, nobody else has that knowledge. You know, most of us, we've had experience when we go to the doctor and the doctor says, what's wrong? Tell me. So you go through a whole list, and yesterday I went to a specialist and the specialist said to me, stop for a minute. Do you mind if I use my AI program? And I said, I beg your pardon? He said, yes, I want to use my AI program. I said, to do what? To record what we're saying here. It writes my notes for me. And I thought, if that turns you on, go for it. So he had this computer with this AI thing recording everything we say. And at the end, he was able to pull up the screen. Everything we said was all there. And I said to him, is it true? He said, yes, it helps me take my notes so I can talk to you. But what it's saying is, here, God doesn't make mistakes when he creates us as human beings. Everything we've got is by his design and by his power. There are no mistakes, no accidents. You are who you are because God designed you with a purpose. And he equipped each one of us with everything that we need in this life and for the next. Now that's what David is saying. He's declaring, this is my God. This is his power at work. Before I was even conceived, God knew all about me. He had a purpose and a plan for me. He put me right where I am with who I have. Wow. And then there's the development. He said, you saw basically everything. Nothing was hidden from you. Everything was planned and written in your book before one day old. So David is saying God was there when I developed in my mother's womb, when I began to live. It was God who instigated and oversaw every part of the process of life. Now, when you stop and think about it, that's amazing. That's our God at work. No one else was there when I was being formed. It all took place in my mother's womb, and no one saw it take place. David is saying no human eyes ever witnessed the process of life except God. So that's amazing. David says God saw David's days before they began. That doesn't take away from man being able to have a free will to make his own choices, but it does mean that God knows the choices that man will make and take. The determination. David states another evidence of God's power at work. All the days of his life are ordained by God. All the days of his life are ordained by God. Can you and I choose when to die? And how are we going to die? How many have put in your wish? How do you want to go? I know you want to go up. But how many of you chose the way you want to exit this world? I'd like to go on my sleep. You know, just go to sleep one day and wake up. And when I wake up in glory. That's my wish. Will I get it? Maybe. It's out of my control. But what... He will. Thank you, Karen. But God knows from the moment that every person is born, he knows the date, he knows the time, he knows the moment, he knows the second. And he alone controls a person's life and destiny. Now, how do I know that? Well, in the scripture it says here, David says, everything is recorded in God's book before it happens. So God must have a big book if every person who's ever been born is written there. The date, they start, what happens, and their expiry date. It's all written down in God's book before it happens. That's a scary thought. Who else could do that? And David says that God knows the time, the place, and the date. He alone controls every person's destiny and life. David is saying in this psalm that God knows every thought. He knows every word and every action before they happen. That's our God. We've talked about God's presence. We've talked about God's knowledge. Now we're talking about God's power altogether. This is our God. There's nothing that he doesn't know about us. The time we're born to the time we die and everything in between. He's there. And David says, I cannot escape from this knowledge. I cannot escape from this power because the Lord formed him and has a purpose for his life. And David is in awe that there's somebody who knows him so intimately. He understands that the number of his days and everything he does has been recorded in God's book. Psalm 56:8 states, you have recorded my troubles. You have kept a list of my tears. Aren't they in your records? Every tear that you've ever shed. Recorded in God's book. Every trouble, every circumstances that you've had in your life. that you think nobody else knew about it or cared. There's one that did, and he's recorded it in his book. David looks at his life and every day that passed, he knows, he understands, he asserts that God has been in charge. God has orchestrated events and people and places to accomplish his very purposes in your life. You think back to the people who suddenly just came into your life when you needed it and gave you that encouragement. Was that just by chance, or was it by divine appointment? You see, David says God knew all about these, and he brought people into our lives when he needed it. So he's overwhelmed. The thought that God would pay so much attention to David, to what happens in his life, it blew his mind that God could do such a thing. And it was precious to him, and so he's reflected on who his God is. Throughout this psalm, God has been trying to wrap his head around the thought of God being everywhere at the same time, while knowing everything he would say or do before it happened, and God's power to do whatever he wanted with his life. Knowing that, there's nothing that could stop God from accomplishing what he wanted. So he was blown away. Now, how do we put it all together? What does God's omnipotence mean for you and me today? How do we put this truth into our lives so that it becomes a reality and not just theory? Yeah, God's all powerful. Wow, wow. How do I put it into practice? And I sometimes think we become stale, and we need to be refreshed and have a new vision about who our God is and what he is. He's not just an old dude that sits in a rocking chair and lets things happen. That's not our God. He's not a God who couldn't care less what happens to the world and the people in it. But what difference does it make? He's not just a friend. And by a friend, we tend to bring God down to our level of understanding. And we then judge God on what normal human friends would do. And God's nothing like that. Nothing at all. And if God is just a friend like anybody else, we have no hope for the future. We need a fresh vision that embraces his power and his majesty. He is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords supreme, not just now, but for all eternity. This is our God. He holds us and the future in his hands. One of the things I like about this, when I think about God's power, is no one can stop God's plans or purposes. Nobody. I look at our world today, it's screwed up. It really is. We've lost sight of what we're to be. We haven't got strong leaders who are giving us that encouragement and values. God has a plan and a purpose for this planet and for every person in it. And God's power says, you cannot stop me from accomplishing my plans. That should be an encouragement. There's no power in this university, in this universe, that can stop God's plans from succeeding. Not evil, not natural catastrophes, not luck, not human error, not even Satan can hinder God's plans from being accomplished. If we look at the book of Job, it starts out with a conversation between God and Satan, which then transferred into the beginning of Job's troubles. And it ends with God confronting Job when he says, Job, were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? Were you there when I put the stars in their places? Have you tried to make a crocodile? What about a rabbit? A simple rabbit, Job. How are you at making rabbits? That's what I thought. In the end, Job bows in silence before a God whose ways are beyond human convention. The other takeaway that I get from this is that God finishes what he starts. And that's an accomplishment. As human beings, how many of you have things you still have to finish? Put your hand up. Are you one of those round to it people? You're going to get around to it. The question is, when? We start off enthusiastically. Yes, I'm going to do this. And then all of a sudden, all the distractions, all the other things come in. You put it on the back burner. I'll get around to it. You're still waiting to get around to it. I know some people who have got the project going. It's been over 20 years. They're still getting around to finishing it. Well, they'll go somewhere else. But the thing about this is God always finishes what he starts. When God starts to do something, he stays with it until it's completed. There is never a divine power failure, never a blackout, never a brownout, never a meltdown. And the other beautiful thing about it is our eternal security rests on God's power to do what he says. We are kept by his power, not by ours. He is the God who is able to keep us from falling. So when God begins a good work in a person's life, he doesn't stop halfway through and says, oh, I better have a smoker break now. He continues until it is finished. And so this should be a source of comfort, a source of encouragement. We're not the finished product yet. God's still working on our lives. Another thing that I take away is, no matter how great the need, God's resources are never depleted. It never happens with God because of his power. And he knows his power has no limits. He's never worn out. Wish we could say the same thing. He's never exhausted. He's never running on fumes. It's no harder for him to create a universe than create an ant. He said, ant be, and there's an ant. He says, universe be, there's a universe. It's all the same to him. That power is all-encompassing. That's why you can safely cast all your cares upon him, for he careth for you. He's got unlimited power to carry all our burdens and to solve all our problems. That's the omnipotence of not just any God. It's the omnipotence of our God. And that should be a wonderful comfort to every believer. The all-powerful God is with me. He exercises his power on my behalf whenever I need him, even when I think I don't. Guess what? He's there. He never fails. All his plans for me will come to pass. So that means the reality is I can trust him completely. It was there at the cross, in that place where the world sees weakness. Here we see the power of God at work. We come helpless to God, who is our help, and he is our strength. If God was not omnipotent, Jesus would still be dead. But if God can raise the dead, he can do anything. He can do everything. So what does that mean for you and I tomorrow or the rest of this day? Will I trust the power of God to accomplish his purposes in my life? When I get frustrated that I haven't got answers to life or what's happening to me, do I know one who does? Or do I believe that? Or do I think I've got to take charge of my own life? Well, let me ask you, how does that work out when you take control of your life? You see, there's only one that can make a difference, and that's the God of the Bible. So more than just a theory, This is practice. It means if God is all powerful, and I believe He is, am I going to trust Him in every area of my life?